Mr. Hughes and his family are very nice, Al explained to Minami as they walked down the streets of Central. I know it's not quite home, but he seems to be able to make it feel like a second one at least, he added with a smile in his voice. Oh God, miss. At least for brother and I. Yeah, Ed nodded in agreement. He's a little over the top, but he's one of the few people in the military that I know we can count on. I see. Minami looked up to see that the three of them were approaching an estate, and she saw none other than Mace Hughes waiting for them out front. Standing next to him was a woman and a young girl, who she assumed were his wife and daughter. Hey there, Minami, Maze greeted her. Just in time. My family and I were expecting you. Isn't that right, my little Alicia? Hey, it's little brother! The little girl pointed to Ed. And big brother! She then pointed to Al. She then looked to Minami and raised a brow in curiosity. She looked down to her hands and held up fingers as she began to count aloud. 1, 2, 3? She looked back up at Minami in wonderment and blinked. Hello. Minami offered a small smile and went to crouch down so that she could look at the little girl at eye level. My name is Minami. Big sister! The young girl squealed. Minami blinked in surprise at the girl's sudden outburst, but then found that she couldn't help but smile. Doesn't she just make your heart melt? Maze swooned. I swear, she's so precious that even after the hardest of days, her little smile can brighten anyone's life. Welcome to our home, Minami. My name is Gracia, Maze's wife introduced herself, as Minami went to stand back up. Nice to meet you, ma'am. Minami bowed her head politely. And welcome back, Edward and Alphonse, Gracia smiled at the Elric brothers. My, have you gotten taller, Edward? Ed's eyes lit up with such a compliment, but Al knew, in reality, he hadn't gotten any taller. It was just that his little cowlick of hair on the top of his head had grown a little longer. Still, he wasn't about to burst his brother's bubble. It's great to be back, Mrs. Hughes, Ed grinned. I really hope that us coming on such short notice isn't a bother for you, Al added. Not at all, Gracia insisted. When May said that you boys were coming over with a friend, I was more than happy to have you over, just like old times. Gracia then looked to Minami. Minami, you must be tired after a long day. We have a guest room you can stay in, and you're more than welcome to join us for dinner tonight. Thank you so much, Minami thanked her. She had to admit, the thought of both food and sleep made her feel a whole lot better. Hi, Max, and hi, Kynes. Welcome to the readings. Excuse me, I'm actually going to take a quick sip of water here. I just realized, I think my cup's not moved over with me, is it? Nope, it's all the way over there. Well, that's unfortunate. I guess I could move it, couldn't I? Where's my water cup? Bring that back. Come here. Come here, come here, come here, come here, come here, come here. I want my water cup. Now I gotta take a sip for good measure. Alright, cool. My water cup is here with me. The head pats, in fact, are not, though. Let's change that. I should have moved everything over with me. Is that appropriate? Good enough. Whatever. This is not what I'm here for. Okay. Get rid of my cup. We shall continue. After a shower, followed by a delicious dinner, Minami retired to the guest room that Gracia offered her. It was only now that she was clean and full that she felt more tired than ever. She tossed her old clothes onto the floor next to the bed, but jumped at the clunk that the heat made as it hit the floor. Oh. Minami realized that the thud was because of her phone that was in her pocket. She reached down to pick up her jeans and dig out everything she had in her pockets. She set down everything on the bed and looked over it all. Her wallet, phone charger, earbuds, and cell phone. These were the only things from her world that came with her. Minami reached to pick up her cell phone and turn it on to see her lock screen. She felt her heart throb at the sight of a picture of her and Kai, hugging each other and holding up peace signs at the camera. They were so happy in this picture. Minami wondered to herself, wherever Kai was he just as scared and tired as she was? Was he safe, somewhere where he could eat and shower, with people who tried to make everything as comfortable as possible, like she was? She knew that she was always one to put on a brave front, but she always knew, deep down, she was just as scared too, most of the time. If he could see her now, and knew what a wreck she's been? Minami shook her head to dismiss her thoughts, as she unlocked her phone, being welcomed by the no service message at the top bar of her screen. Not surprising, Minami let out a weak, bitter chuckle. Still, she navigated her way to her contacts and found Kai's name. What harm would it do to try, she thought. Minami pressed Kai's name, and then held the phone up to her ear. She closed her eyes, only being welcomed by silence. No ring, no busy tone, not even a recording telling her that the line is out of service. Of course it wouldn't. Minami started to move her phone away from her ear, but stopped when she thought she heard something. A chirp? A half ring? The sound was enough to give Minami hope once more, and she not only pushed her phone tightly against her ear, but she used her other hand to hold it there even closer. She waited in anticipation, feeling her heart start to pound in her chest. After a few more moments of silence, click! Hey! You've reached Kai Kurashima! Kai? Minami gasped. I'm afraid I'm not here at this moment, but leave a message after the beep. Kai's recorded voice took a deep breath. Beep! Beep! What? Despite hearing the tone, Minami was rendered silent. She stood there, utterly shocked that she had even made it to Kai's voicemail. She then realized that she was limited on time. Voicemail recordings weren't long, and she didn't know if she would be able to get this far again. She quickly composed herself before starting to speak. I have no idea how I'm leaving this voicemail right now. There's no Wait, that doesn't matter. Minami got flustered and shook her head. Kai, please be alright. I found Russell, and he told me that you managed to escape before... Minami realized she was rambling again. She stopped herself and took a breath. I don't know where you are, but I just hope you're safe. I promise, I'll do everything I can to find... You have exceeded the maximum time for recording. Thank you for calling. Goodbye. Click. Minami lowered her phone from her ear to look at her phone and see that the call had disconnected. She watched as the phone returned to her lock screen of the photo of her and her best friend. Her eyes quickly welled up with tears and pulled out. A teardrop fell from each eye, landing on both her and Kai's faces in the picture. Minami took a shaky breath and stuffed the phone in her pajama pants pocket. She turned to the bed and took all of her belongings to shove in her other pocket before she plopped down to sit on the bed. She lifted her hands so that she could hold her face in her hands, not even noticing that the door behind her had opened. Hey, Minami? Can I come in? Minami flinched when she heard Maze Hughes' voice, and she quickly wiped her eyes with her sleeves before he could see her face as he stepped in. Gracie, I figured you could use a cup of tea. It could help you sleep better, you know, Maze said, as he approached her bed and set the mug of tea on her nightstand. Minami accidentally let out a soft sniffle before speaking. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Despite that she sniffled, she turned to look back at him and put on a pretty believable smile. The only thing that gave her away was that, even though she wiped away her tears, her eyes were still red and puffy. Hi, Chaos. Welcome. Maze offered a small smile. You look like you got a lot on your mind. Want to talk about it? Minami's smile faded, and she looked down to her lap. I wouldn't know where to begin. Go ahead and try, Maze chuckled as he went to sit down next to her on the bed. I'm no seasoned traveler, but I've definitely seen and been through quite a few things in my time. I work for the military. I already know about what happened to your world, as well as the ultimatum that the Fuhrer gave you. Minami tensed at the word ultimatum. Maze decided to continue speaking. The boys may have also spilled the beans about the situation with your friend, but hey, they're just concerned about you. Minami didn't seem to mind. She was quiet for a long moment before letting out a sigh. Can I ask you something? She kept her eyes on her lap. Shoot. I'm hearing that you guys are looking for Keyblades and their wielders, Minami started. That's right, Maze nodded. So, like, in the plural sense? How many have you found, other than me? Well, as you know, it's currently just you, Maze answered. There was a point where there were more, but those days have long come and gone. Honestly, I've been investigating it for a while myself, but so far, not much to say. Minami sighed again, with a hint of a whine in her voice, as she went to bury her face in her hands once again. I was supposed to start high school tomorrow, and now I'm here, apparently the only ray of hope when it comes to fighting this darkness and saving the whole galaxy, when I had no idea about any of it until now. She paused for a moment. I'm trying to be brave, but... She took a shaky breath as she lifted her head from her hands and looked up to Maze with trembling, scared eyes. This is way over my head, Mr. Hughes, she confessed. On top of that, if I say no to this ultimatum, I'm not only stranded here, but I'm also considered an enemy. If I say yes, and if I do somehow manage to do whatever it is I'm supposed to do, I'm just going to be bound to a military from a world entirely different from my own. And I doubt that they're going to let their only Keyblade wielder go home so easily. In that moment, Minami realized, no matter how she put it, she was trapped. Her face twisted into a pained scowl, and she turned her head to hide it. She was frustrated at how much she had cried in front of people today, especially because she hadn't even let Kai see her cry since the first day they met. It's a huge burden, no doubt about it, May said quietly. Everyone I know joined the military out of choice, even those two boys. But you? You didn't ask for this. You didn't want this. And now everything is going to be different. Some might say that that's just life or part of growing up, but I think this is different. This is bigger than most people could handle, let alone imagine. Minami glanced out of the corner of her eye to see that Maze had taken off his glasses and was wiping them with a cloth as he continued speaking. Even if you weren't going to be, even if you weren't going to be an enemy of the state, you don't seem to be the kind of person who would just sit back and do nothing. At least to me, he said. Either way, it would still be up to you. I might be part of the military, but I'm not going to pressure you to join. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I can tell you what you can do. Minami turned her head to look at Maze just as he finished wiping down his glasses and put them back on his face before looking back at her. What you can do is save and restore your world, and salvage, if not regain, what was lost. What you can do is find and save your friend, and furthermore, what you can do is trust us. Minami's eyes widened a little more, allowing him to continue. I can't say what will happen once you've finished your duties, but I can promise you that, once you've sealed away the Heartless once and for all, that will leave you to your world and keep you out of our affairs. With that, Maze offered her a reassuring smile. I have a friend higher up who will make sure of that. The boys, the colonel, and everyone else. All of them are going to be working, not just for us, but also for you. I know we might seem like strangers right now, but just know that you're not alone. Minami stared back at him, her eyes wide. That was not only incredibly touching, but it made sense. For the first time since she came to this world, what somebody said to her didn't confuse her, terrify her, or both. Right now, Maze had laid out her options in such a simple yet straightforward way, but what he said also didn't scare her. In fact, it gave her hope. Minami couldn't explain it, but she felt so much better. Despite this, the already existent tears in her eyes spilled out when she finally blinked, and she quickly went to wipe her eyes with her sleeve. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. After she finished rubbing away her tears, she lowered her arm to reveal a soft smile on her face. Maze couldn't help but smile a little brighter in response. No problem, Minami. You just rest up for now. As he went to stand up, the bedroom door opened to reveal Alphonse Elric. Hi, Minami, the suit of armor greeted her, seeming to be uncomfortable. This is awkward, but, I have to spend the night with you, he squeaked, nervously reaching to touch the back of his metal helmet as if he were scratching it. Huh? Minami blinked. I kind of have to, since, Brother and I are supposed to watch you? Watch me? Minami asked, now feeling uncomfortable herself. We have the order that we gotta be within 6 feet of you of all times, a voice grumbled from behind the suit of armor. The door opened further, revealing Edward stepping in with a small mattress under one arm and a bundle consisting of pillows and a blanket in the other. I see, Minami resisted the urge to frown. And just like that, the moment of feeling better was over. What is this? Some kind of slumber party? Maze asked, trying to lighten the mood. Perhaps my little Alicia can join. It could be your very first slumber party. No, that's fine, Minami insisted. All of this is... She had to take a deep breath before forcing a smile as she finished her sentence. Perfectly fine. It was obvious to her that the Elric brothers weren't doing this by their own accord. They were forced to do this just as much as she was. She knew that the best thing she could do for everyone at this moment was to not be difficult. Maze read through her expression like an open book. Come on, the guest room across the hall is too far away to watch her? He looked back to Ed, letting out a chuckle. I don't know if I trust two boys in the same room as a girl. After all, you're all getting to be at that age. Minami's face drained of color. Absolutely not, Ed glared at Maze after plopping the mattress down on the floor. She's got nothing to worry about, trust me. We're here because it's our job. The suit of armor let out a weak, nervous chuckle. Sorry, Minami, just pretend we're not here. Yeah, Ed said in agreement as he put down his blanket and pillow. We'll stay on the other side of the room and give you your space. Maze could only sigh softly through his nose. Orders were orders. All right, he walked to the door. But I'm keeping the door open. Thank God, Minami thought to herself as Maze stepped out of the room. She went to crawl under the covers of her bed. She remembered that Maze had left tea on the bedside table, and she reached to hold the mug in both hands. I'm gonna change the song because it's just kind of not in the mood. Sorry. I hear this kind of drumming happening in the background. It's taking me out of the story as much as it's probably taking you guys out. Also, speaking of which, is the music okay? Can you guys even hear the music, or am I the only one having to deal with this? I will take a moment. No, Zopi, I did not go to those worlds. From what Minami has told us in the past, I've been to the feudal era and the East Blue. Yes, Professor is correct. You can also see that information below the video player. I have a little travel log section that kind of tells you guys where I'm at. And welcome, Froyo Fox. And now that I'm caught up with the chat, I'm going to take a sip of water. And then I shall continue. All right. Get away, water cup. She remembered that Maze had left tea on the bedside table, and she reached to hold the mug in both hands. I'm gonna change. I'll be back. Okay, brother. Minami watched the Elric brothers have a short exchange before Ed walked out of the room. After he disappeared into the hallway, Al glanced back at Minami, who quickly averted her eyes and went to sip her tea. She hummed softly in response to how the warm drink relieved her throat. At least this world has tea. This thought had Minami begin to wonder what else this world had that was the same as her home. Her eyes scanned the room and recognized all of the basic furniture. Some framed pictures on the wall, a clock, but one that was analog. The biggest difference she noticed was that there was no TV, but a radio on a corner table across the room. This world was definitely... this world was similar to her own. That much was certain, but it definitely wasn't the same. By the time Ed had returned in pajamas, his hair was now free of a braid. Minami had finished her tea. She set the empty mug on the bedside table and went to roll over on her side, her back facing the Elric brothers. From behind her, she heard Al's metal steps approach the bedside table. She wondered if Al was going to say something, but then the light clicked off before his metal steps returned to the opposite side of the room. After Al had sat down next to his brother's mattress, the room fell silent. Minami, after a few moments, started to feel uncomfortable because of it. She decided to pull her phone and earbuds out of her pocket. Whenever she was feeling lousy, music always helped. She plugged in an earbud into one of her ears, and paused before she could plug the other one into the other ear. She suddenly felt obligated to say something to Ed now. Good night. Night, she heard Ed grumble. Good night, Minami. Al, on the other hand, sounded a little happy. Minami left it at just that. She plugged in her other earbud, navigated through her phone's music playlist under the covers, and closed her eyes once she had settled on a song. And only moments later, she was already asleep. Vrr! Vrr! Minami shot straight up, her heart racing. It felt like she had just woken up from one of those falling dreams, yet she had no recollection of whether or not she had even had a dream. Her head whipped to the source of the noise that jolted her awake, and saw her cell phone vibrating harshly on the wooden surface of that was her nightstand. Wait, her nightstand? In that moment, Minami realized she knew exactly where she was. I'm in my room, she whispered, like saying it aloud had confirmed it to be true. She was home. Minami snatched her phone from her nightstand to see that her alarm was going off. It was 10 a.m., the time that she was supposed to wake up on the morning of the carnival. Minami then couldn't help but smile from ear to ear. Today was the carnival, which meant... It was all a dream, Minami laughed to herself as she jumped out of the bed. As she got ready for the day, she had deduced that she had one of those dreams that was warning her not to make silly mistakes, like sleeping through her alarm or forgetting to brush her hair. And if I didn't, the whole world would have been destroyed. She couldn't remember when she last had a dream that was so ridiculous. That's it. No more snacks less than 2 hours before bed. She pointed her hairbrush to her reflection in the mirror, trying to keep a stern look, but she was quick to burst out laughing once more. As she walked out, thinking of how she couldn't wait to tell Kai the story of her dream, she had failed to notice that she was wearing a blue star-shaped necklace around her neck. Minami walked down the street at a comfortable pace, not worried about being pressed for time. She was now able to wait at the crosswalks, so that she could cross safely without worry of getting hit by any cars. Aw, Demon Bond, thank you for the raid! Also love how it says card, not cars. I know that's supposed to be cars, but that's fine. Welcome, Raiders. I am reading my travel log to you all. I hope you all enjoy. If you are interested, there's info on my travel log below the video player, where you can either read along or read ahead, because apparently there are things in the travel log in the readable version that include extra scenes that I can't read to you guys for the sake of spoiling my own life, I guess. I don't know. I don't get it. I'm gonna just read. When she arrived at the entrance for the carnival, she found no sign of Kai. Huh. Weird. Minami went to pull out her phone to check the time. It was about time for them to meet, but Kai was usually early for meetups. She figured it wouldn't hurt to call him, but just as she put her phone to ear... Kai suddenly appeared in front of her, sweaty and out of breath. His hair was even a little messier than usual. Sorry, Kai wheezed. I slept past my alarm somehow, and Minami suddenly lunged forward, pulling him into a tight hug. Wow! Kai blinked in surprise from the sudden hug, but reached to hug her back. Happy to see you too, Minami! Sorry, Minami apologized, also chuckling weakly as she released her best friend. I just had a really weird dream last night. I'll tell you more, but let's go inside first. Again, Minami failed to notice that she and Kai were already sporting their star and moon necklaces around their necks. Shortly after walking inside, Minami noticed a tent off to the side, and she frowned at the sight of it. Wanna check it out? Kai asked, having followed her glance to the tent. Nope, Minami said bluntly. Let's get food. I'm starving. With that, she pulled Kai to walk in the opposite direction of the tent. She didn't care what was in this tent, and if it was anything like in her dream, she had no desire to find out. Anyway, I wanted to tell you about this whack dream I had. After they went to the food stand to get kebabs, without paying money for some reason, Minami and Kai made their way to their usual spot on the pier to sit and eat. As they munched on their food and overlooked the sunset, Minami told Kai the whole story of her dream. So, I was basically kidnapped by this midget and his robot while you got swallowed by this huge tornado of shadow monsters, and I was taken to this different planet that was like ours, but like also the 1920s? Minami looked over to see Kai staring blankly at her, making her scoff. I told you it was whack, she grinned at him. No kidding, Kai chuckled nervously. But, weird or not, it was just a dream. I'm still here, see? He waved his kebab and he chuckled. And I can say without a doubt that even if something crazy like that happened, nothing would keep us apart, right? Minami's smile grew bigger, and she nodded to her best friend. Right. She then went to take another bite, but something hard bumped against her mouth instead of food. Ow! What? Minami looked down, and her eyes went wide at the sight of not a kebab in her hand, but the keyblade. What? Minami raised her head to look up, and saw that the skies were dark and gray, the clouds swirling ominously. She then looked to her side to see that Kai was no longer sitting next to her. Kai? She called out, quickly standing up and looking around. She finally located Kai, standing at the threshold of the pier. His head was lowered, and his bangs were shielding his eyes. Behind him, the Shadow Heartless were running amok, destroying the carnival and attacking people, just like before. Minami broke out into a run towards Kai, but it felt as if she was never getting any closer to him. No matter how hard she ran, he remained far away from her. Kai! Minami cried, outstretching her hand to reach out for him. She swore she heard him begin to chuckle, and saw that he had raised his head to reveal his face, his expression starting to shift into something dark, as if he were laughing while crying. But then his eyes met hers, and his expression changed into a dark and angry glare. You liar. Huh? Minami came to a halt, frozen in shock. Kai's shadow suddenly extended and towered above him, then split into 7. Each shadow started to make a distinct shape and size, but Minami couldn't properly make any of them out. She could only watch in horror as Kai's body was then enveloped by darkness. From within, Minami could see Kai give her a sinister grin as his brown eyes suddenly changed into a bright crimson red. Suddenly, the darkness surrounding him exploded into a black, fiery aura. Minami shielded her face by holding the keyblade in front of her, but the aura was so strong that it had pushed her back. Excuse me. Kai! She cried out his name again, but lost her balance and fell backwards. Instantly, she realized that she wasn't going to land on the pier, but that she somehow was falling backwards over the edge. As she fell, she saw Kai step to the edge of the pier, not to reach for her and help her, but merely to look down on her and watch her fall with those glowing crimson eyes. Splash! As Minami fell in and submerged under the chillingly cold water, she realized its familiarity immediately. As Minami fell in and submerged under this sensation, it was the same as the last dream she had, but this time, instead of being pushed into the water from above, she felt like something was pulling her down, from below her. Minami let out a scream that was only muffled in the water, her chest getting tight after releasing the wasted air. She looked up to the surface, her vision of Kai getting dark and murky as she was pulled deeper and deeper under the water. Minami tried to scream as hard as she could once more, but only released bubbles. Then she blacked out. Gah! Minami yelped, jumping to sit upright. She frantically looked around the dark room, not immediately recognizing where she was. The disorientation was overwhelming, and Minami went to hold her head with shaky hands, breathing raggedly. Minami? Al was quick to notice that something was wrong. He didn't bother waking up his brother as he swiftly stood up to rush to Manami's bedside. Did something happen? Are you all right? She wasn't responding. Al felt himself getting more worried by the second. He couldn't really see her face, but he could hear her panting short and panicked breaths. Was she trembling? He noticed something hanging out of her ear. It looked like a cord. He then realized that there was a chance that she couldn't hear him. What was he supposed to do? He was watching her have a panic attack, but how could he help her? What if she looked up and saw him towering over her in the dark? Not even a second after Al had that thought, Manami did just that. She lifted her head and instantly saw the shadow hovering over her, with glowing red eyes. The same red eyes that Manami saw Kai with in her dream. Her eyes widened in horror. She instinctively flinched backwards, so harshly that one of her earbuds fell out of her ear. It's all right, Manami, Al whispered, holding his hands up passively. It's me, Alphonse. You're safe. No. Manami shook her head quickly, making the other earbud fall out of her ear. No, I'm not safe, she whimpered, reaching to pull her knees close to her chest. He's not safe. Who? Oh, you mean Kai? He's in trouble, Manami stammered. Why did he call me a liar? Where? Manami couldn't find the words to form a proper sentence, and gave up with another whimper. She moved her hands to tightly grasp her necklace and hold it with both hands, clutching it to her chest for dear life. Calm down, Al pleaded. You had a bad dream. It's okay now. The suit of armor slowly knelt down by the bed so that he could be more eye level with her. Behind them, Ed let out a loud snore, indicating that he hadn't so much as stirred from his sleep this whole time. Al reached on to turn on the light. He figured that if Ed hadn't woken up by now, he wouldn't be waking up at all. Ed merely groaned and rolled over, facing away from the light, before returning to his snoring. With a sigh, Al turned to look back at Manami, seeing that she had buried her face in her knees. He noticed her trembling shoulders slowly rising and lowering. It took him a moment, but he realized that she was forcing herself to take deep breaths. Eventually, her shoulders stopped shaking, at least as harshly as before. She continued to take slow, even breaths. The worst of it seemed to be over. Al hesitated to ask, "Are you okay?" Manami slowly nodded into her knees, before slowly lifting her head so that she could meet his eyes. "I'm sorry that you had to see that." She looked more tired than she did before she went to bed. "Oh, don't worry," Al assured her, his voice comforting. "Brother used to have the same kind of dreams when we were younger. Sometimes he still does." He glanced back to his brother, who seemed to still be sleeping peacefully. "I'm used to things like this." "Still, I woke you up," Manami said, making Al look back at her and blink in surprise. Did she not know? Actually, you didn't," Al said quietly. "You were already up?" Manami asked, tilting her head. "Well," Al started, I don't sleep because, well, I literally can't. Not with this body." Manami's brows furrowed a little. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I understand." Al gave a nod, already knowing that she hadn't caught on. She saw the inside of his armor, but she never asked about it. He could only assume that she figured that it was none of her business, something that Ed wished more people did. He glanced over his shoulder to his brother once more, knowing that Ed wouldn't have approved of him telling Manami about their situation. Not only was it personal, but it was also something that could get them in a lot of trouble. Still, Al knew that he and Ed were about to embark on a journey with this girl, so maybe telling her a little about himself would help them get to know each other better, to where she didn't see them as strangers anymore, and maybe she could even be a little more comfortable around them. "It's complicated, but I'll explain the best I can," Al finally said, looking back at her. "This body, as you know, it's just hollow armor. The reason I'm able to walk around and talk is because my heart is bound to it." He paused for a moment. "I lost my real body, and my brother lost an arm and a leg. What you see on him now are automail, metal prosthetic limbs. He still blames himself for what happened to both of us." Manami could only stare in silent disbelief after hearing Al's explanation. Finally, she managed to muster some words to whisper. "I'm so sorry." She realized, right after saying that she thought that she should say something more. She looked down and thought for a moment. "Was that something that happened while you were in the military?" "No," Al shook his head. "It was long before that. The whole reason we even joined the military is because it was our best option if we wanted to get our bodies back to normal. We did this to ourselves." Manami bit her lower lip, now feeling bad for Al. She felt bad for both of them. She paused. Being my bodyguard isn't helping you get your bodies back, is it? That doesn't matter, Minami, Al replied, shaking his head. Right now, all these worlds are in danger. Getting my body back won't mean anything if I have no world left to return to. It's been years, but we can wait a little longer. Despite what he said, Al didn't sound sad about it. He sounded like he had already thought this through and had set his priorities. Right now, you need us more, he told her. But Minami found herself to be unhappy with that response. That's not fair. Huh? Al blinked in surprise. Why does everything have to be one or the other? She asked, frowning up at him. Why does it have to be that you two have to drop everything to follow me around? Why does it have to be that I have to say yes or no to this ultimatum? Al found himself unable to answer, and he averted his eyes. You say it doesn't matter, but it matters to me that you already have something you need to do, but you're... The realization had clicked in her mind, making her eyes widen as she finished her sentence. Just as stuck as I am. Al looked back to Minami, but still couldn't think of any way to respond. After all, she had hit the nail on the head. Sorry, Minami finally said, after a long pause, and lifted a hand to hold her head. I just don't get it. If we really have to stick together, shouldn't we be helping each other? But Minami, we are helping each other. Minami looked up to the suit of armor with surprise. My brother and I are helping you to find your friend and save your world, and you're helping us protect ours, Al told her. Besides, there's always a chance that we could find the answer what we're looking for while we're with you. Keyblade holds many secrets, and can unlock many more. Minami smiled a little back at him. I can only hope that would be the case. I feel pretty lousy at the thought of keeping you away from your goal longer than you need to be. I like to think that traveling to these different worlds with you will be our best bet to finding what we're looking for, Al replied, a smile in his tone. Neither of them had noticed that Ed had stopped snoring a while ago. He had actually woken up, but didn't reveal such. He just laid on his side, his back facing them as he silently listened to their conversation, frowning down at the floor. I guess I'm allowed to know that one. I didn't know that. I thought he was sleeping this whole time. Oh my gosh, he heard the conversation. Excuse me, I'm gonna take this moment to have a sip of water. I feel my throat getting a little... How's everyone doing tonight? Oh my gosh, it's already been almost an hour. Sippy, 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 sip. Alright. Back to it. But please, don't worry about us, Minami, Al assured the Keyblade wielder. We're fine. I promise. If anything, we're more worried about you. Yeah, I've been a wreck this whole time, haven't I? Minami couldn't muster a smile, but she went to rub the back of her head. Back home, I was always considered the brave one between Kai and I. He wouldn't believe it if he saw me now, crying and having panic attacks. Minami let out another bitter chuckle. If he did see you like that, I'm sure he'd had no problem lifting you up and being your strength, Al assured her. After all, that's what happens sometimes with me and brother, when one of us comes close to giving up. Minami gave a nod, but found herself thinking of the dream she just had. She couldn't shake this bad feeling she had. She went to touch her necklace once again. But now, I have no idea where he is, she said quietly. That dream. I can't shake the feeling that he's in trouble. Wherever he is, you'll find him. And brother and I will help you. That's a promise, Al said. Minami couldn't help but smile back at him. Well, if that's the case, I'll help you get your bodies back to normal, and that'll be my promise. That's fair, right? Al blinked, but couldn't help but let out a chuckle. He didn't even tell her about equivalent exchange, but she seemed to already have a knack for it. He hummed, giving her a nod. I think that's plenty fair, but for now, you should try to get back to sleep. Minami nodded back to him, going to lay back down under the covers as Al reached to turn off the light. Like before, she felt obligated to say something before Al went back to the other side of the room. Oh, Al stopped and turned to look back at her. Did you need something? No, Minami shook her head before offering a small smile. I just wanted to say thank you. Al gave a nod to her, wishing that he could give her a smile in return. You're welcome, he said, a smile in his voice instead. Good night, Minami. And good night, Zuckby. Have a good night. Alright, that was chapter 5. So, oh, my cup is still here. Goodness. I thought I got rid of that. Okay, chapter 6. Let's go, kids. Minami awoke the next morning, finding herself not in her room, but the guest bedroom at the Hughes residence. The truth was finally sinking in. What she hoped was just a dream was, in fact, very real. Minami groaned softly, going to sit up in her bed and rub the sleep out of her eyes. Good morning, Minami. She looked up to see Al sitting in his spot across the room. She noticed that Ed wasn't in the bed beside him. Maybe he went to go to the bathroom? Minami opened her mouth to say hello, but the door opened, and Maze walked in before she could. Morning, Minami! Sleep well? He greeted her, stepping inside. He wore the same blue uniform that Roy Mustang and Riza Hawkeye wore, while holding a mug of coffee in his hand. Just checking up on you before I head on over to Central Command. Think you kids might need a lift? Or you need more time to think things over? It took Minami a second to understand what he meant. Oh, her expression hardened a little. No, I think I've made my decision. Great! Maze beamed. What'd you decide? Isn't that technically confidential? Minami chuckled nervously. I think your boss should be the first to know. Fuhrer is what we call him, Maze corrected her, but nicely. But yeah, you're probably right. That be the case? I'll bring you kids over to headquarters so you don't have to walk. Before Minami could thank him, Gracia stepped in the room with Alicia. Good morning, Minami. I washed your clothes for you. Alicia, dear, could you give them to her? Yes, Mommy! The young girl took the neatly folded clothes from her mother and crossed the room to hand them to Minami. Here you go, Nami, she beamed. Minami couldn't help but smile as she reached to take the clothes from her. Thank you very much, Alicia. Al internally smiled at the sight of them. It was so nice to see Minami smile. From behind him, he heard a sniffle. He turned to look and saw Maze tearing up at the sight of the girls. They're so cute! They could be sisters! I'm gonna get ready then. Minami hadn't noticed Maze and went to get up. She took the clean clothes with her out of the room and down the hall to the bathroom where she had showered the night prior. As she neared the door, it opened. She stopped at the sight of Ed stepping out of the bathroom. He was dressed in the same outfit and red coat that he wore yesterday, reaching behind his head to tie his hair back while he had a hair tie in his teeth. He stopped at the sight of Minami standing in front of him. Mornin', he greeted her, through the teeth that were still holding his hair tie. Minami gave him a small nod. Morning. The two stood there in awkward silence until Minami finally stepped to the side to allow Ed to pass her. She watched silently as he walked past her and returned to the guest bedroom they spent the night in. It was easier to talk to Al, for sure, but Ed was just as stuck with her. The problem was that Minami wasn't quite sure how to really get along with Ed yet. She dismissed the thought with a shrug and went into the bathroom so that she could get ready. When she finished, she stared at her reflection in the mirror for a long moment. She knew what her decision was. It wasn't like she had much choice, but at least she had time to think about it all. She was now nervous as to where things would go from here. Minami took a deep breath through her nose, then let it out through her mouth. She frowned at her reflection and pointed to it. You got this. Back home, whenever Minami was nervous or scared about something, she would have a pep talk with her reflection. Sometimes it helped her feel better. It didn't really now. Knock, knock. Minami jumped and startled back to reality. Hey, Minami, May's voice spoke, muffled from behind the bathroom door. Just letting you know that we have some breakfast on the table. You don't want to face the day on an empty stomach, do you? Don't be afraid to join us when you're done in there. Okay, thank you, Minami replied. Breakfast did sound nice. Having breakfast together, Minami sharing the table with the Hughes family and the Elrics was probably the best moment so far in Amestris. Everyone seemed to really appreciate her company, and for a moment, Minami forgot about the things that scared her. It almost felt like she was part of a family gathering, even though she wasn't related to any of them. Even after the meal, Minami was probably in her best spirits so far. As Maze went to bring Minami, Ed, and Al to his car, Minami blurted out something. Shotgun! She beamed. Huh? Ed and Al gasped. What? Where? Maze looked around. I thought I kept that in the house, in case anyone tries to lay a finger on my daughter. Minami and the Elric brothers stared at him in awkward silence. What? Maze asked. I just wanted to sit in the front seat, Minami said quietly, only having realized now that Amestrians clearly didn't use the term shotgun to call dibs. Oh, then why didn't you say so? Maze laughed. It's just a thing we say on my world, Minami explained, feeling sheepish. What does that have to do with shotguns? Ed asked. Maybe they threaten each other with shotguns to see who gets the front seat? Al mused. No, Minami insisted, getting more embarrassed by the second. It's just an expression. After Maze drove... Actually, you know what? I'm gonna pause that for a second. I'm gonna have more water. I need to keep hydrated when I'm doing these readings. Oh my goodness. We're almost done anyway, but yeah. Believe it or not, it takes a little bit more of a voice to do the whole reading thing. Because it's like I read with heart and expression. Alright. Up to it then. After Maze drove Minami and the Elric brothers to Central Command, he left them under the care and supervision of Roy Mustang, who then made the phone call to inform the Fuhrer that the Keyblade wielder had arrived. Minami sat down on one of Roy's couches, staring down at her hands that were folded tightly in her lap. Despite that she knew what she was going to say, her heart was still beating harshly in her chest. Ed now sat on the other couch across from her, also awkwardly waiting. No one wanted to say anything. Ring, ring! Minami jumped at the sudden sound and looked to see Roy answer his phone. Colonel Roy Mustang speaking. Yes. Yes. Right away. He hung up the phone and then looked to Minami and the Elric brothers. The Fuhrer is ready for you three in his office to discuss the ultimatum. He looked over to Riza standing beside his desk. Lieutenant, could you escort them? Yes, sir. And with that, Minami followed behind Riza, the Elric brothers following behind Minami to walk to the Fuhrer's office. His office was a little far away and on the topmost floor, but it made sense considering how important he was. And with that, change the style of music? Not uplifting. So dramatic. I'm feeling a little dramatic right now. They approached a set of wide double doors, which Riza opened, and then gestured Minami and the Elric brothers inside. Minami swallowed nervously and stepped inside, followed by the Elric brothers, and then Riza following after them. Minami noticed immediately how different the Fuhrer's office was from Roy Mustang's. To start, it was a much bigger room than any other she had been in. It also contained nicer quality furniture, extravagant to where it might as well have been a throne room. So, Minami, I hear from Colonel Mustang that you've made your decision. Minami looked up to see the same man she met yesterday, Fuhrer King Bradley. I'm quite impressed. You were able to come to one faster than expected, Bradley said, sitting at a desk across the room. Please take a seat in front of my desk. I'm curious about everything you have to say. As Minami slowly began to approach his desk, Bradley looked up to Riza. Oh, you may leave them here and resume your other duties, Lieutenant, he told her. I'll take things from here. Sorry, I'm reading Professor's thing now. So, I guess... Dang it, I didn't put my cup away again. You guys have to let me know when I don't put away my cup and start reading again. Now I'm gonna take a drink without my cup. Alright. Minami looked back to see Riza saluting her Fuhrer before leaving the room and shutting the doors behind her with a loud click. She turned back to face Bradley and slowly went to sit in the chair in front of him. Ed stepped to Minami's left while Al stood at her right. I haven't been paying much attention to the cup. That's okay. Bradley put his elbows on his desk and folded his hands together as he stared at her with his one and only eye, as if he were already judging her. Minami felt herself already getting intimidated. It was as if the look he was giving her was telling her, mind your tongue, child. She opened her mouth to speak. Nothing came out. Ed and Al both looked at her out of the corners of their eyes, watching her take a deep breath before trying to speak again. With all due respect, she started. There was only one real answer. Bradley merely raised his eyebrows, allowing her to continue. This is all new to me. Darkness, Heartless, Keyblades, Minami said. But for whatever reason, I'm chosen as a wielder. And as it stands, I'm the only one, right? That's correct, Bradley nodded. Minami nodded slowly. I just have one question before I give you my answer, sir. Yes? Minami took another deep breath. You said yesterday, if I were to say no to this ultimatum, that would make me your enemy. My question is, how would you intend to fight the darkness and save these worlds if you were enemies with the only Keyblade wielder you've found? Ed and Al's eyes widened in shock. Why is she asking that? They both thought. Why did I just ask that? Minami was internally kicking herself, but somehow she was managing to keep her composure outwardly. Bradley didn't say anything for a long moment, only giving Minami a very intense stare that made her shrink more and more by the second. The dreadful silence made Ed break out into a cold sweat. It was even making Minami begin to sweat. She considered taking back her question before the Fuhrer suddenly let out a hearty laugh, much to everyone's surprise. How very astute, he said, before regaining his composure. As I said, a Keyblade is a powerful weapon. With it, one can close the very holes through reality that the Heartless pour in from. But it's also possible that they can open more and bring entire worlds to ruin, Bradley explained. At some point in your life, you could literally become powerful enough to plunge entire worlds into darkness, like with what happened to your world. I think you can see why we can't risk you going down the wrong path. With that, he unfolded his hands and rested them on the arms of his chair. The truth is that our ability to deal with these threats are limited, he continued. We have developed ways of sealing these holes where the Heartless emerge by using magic and alchemy. However, such seals are not only just temporary, but the resources and power needed are costly, and the manner to go about it is tedious at best. A Keyblade is more efficient for both sealing and locating keyholes. Minami said nothing, processing everything as the Fuhrer was telling her. So, to answer your question, he continued, we'd go about fighting the darkness the same way we have for years, but we'd also have to look for another Keyblade wielder who would join our ranks, act quickly, and not doom us all. Minami nodded slowly. I see. She looked down to her lap, thinking for a moment before speaking again. Well, I'm not here to make enemies or doom anyone. Minami clenched her hands tightly in her lap. I know my world was lost, but others were too, weren't they? If I'm the only one you have who can turn things around, who can defeat the darkness and restore these worlds. She took another deep breath, then lifted her head so she could look Bradley in the eye. Then, I have to accept your offer. Bradley's lips curled into a smile. But, Minami spoke up, making Bradley's smile immediately fade. Yes, he asked, in a tone that didn't show any sign of impatience. Along with that mission, I have 2 more that I want to undertake, sir. Oh, Bradley hummed, and what will those additional missions be? When I lost my world, I also lost my best friend, Kai, Minami frowned. I got word that he escaped when our world was lost, which means that he's somewhere out there. My first mission is that I need to find him. This song does not suit this scene at all. Skipping, thank you. Sorry to break from that for a second. Man, I don't like this playlist at all, actually. Go back to somber. Somber enough for this. Okay. I got word that he escaped when our world was lost, which means that he's somewhere out there. My first mission is that I need to find him. Riley gave her a nod. And the second? Minami glanced at Ed and Al before looking back to Bradley. These 2 had obligations of their own before being assigned to be my bodyguards. I'd like for my second mission to be to help them find whatever they were looking for. Ed now looked down at her, eyes wide. Before they could object, Bradley spoke. As long as you swear to never use your powers to attack the military you serve, the world we stand on, or any worlds for that matter, you're free to do whatever you please when you're in between assignments, he said. I've already allowed the Elrics to do their personal research on the side, and I shall grant you the same courtesy. Bradley then reached in his desk to pull out a document. But, his expression darkened, the moment you need to be summoned, whether it's due to a crisis or something as simple as answering questions, it is mandatory that you return. Bradley set down the document on the desk and slid it across to Minami. It was a contract. Feel free to take your time reading before you sign, Fuhrer said. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Minami swallowed thickly at the sight of the contract, but picked it up to read over. Seeing everything in writing had made her more nervous than ever before. Still, she read the contract all the way through, and slowly picked up the pen that Bradley had also provided her. Ed and Al watched her closely out of the corners of their eyes, still standing at attention for their Fuhrer. They could see her hand that was holding the pen, trembling a little. Minami knew that she had to sign the document. Not only were there multiple worlds depending on her, but she had to find Kai. There was no other way to do those things than by joining the Amestrian military. But still, she couldn't shake this bad feeling. Finally, Minami gripped her pen tightly and signed her name on the line at the bottom of the page. Once she finished signing, an empty feeling washed over her, causing her to let the pen fall out of her hand onto the desk with a light tap. Ed frowned a little, while Al looked down to his feet. They both had felt guilty for her, but now, seeing that hopeless look in her eyes as she signed herself away, they recalled feeling similar when they joined the military, but the difference was that they joined the military on their own accord. Minami didn't have a choice. Congratulations, you are now officially among the ranks of the Amestrian military, Bradley announced, taking back the document. You will be serving and protecting not just our world, but numerous worlds across the galaxy. Welcome aboard, Minami. Your training starts this afternoon. Wait, already? Al asked, realizing afterwards that he was speaking out of place. Exactly as I said, Bradley confirmed. We already have Minami's training session scheduled. Would you boys please escort our new Keyblade wielder to the courtyard at noon? We'll begin things with some magic training, so that she can begin to unlock the Keyblade's power. Afterward, there will be some sword training to further her combat prowess. Sword training? Al squeaked. Magic training? Ed followed up, his voice also higher pitched. Yes, Bradley answered. She has been assigned 2 teachers to oversee each form of training. There was a long pause, before Ed and Al suddenly hunched over, as if they were sulking. Minami swore she could hear Al let out a whimper. Ahem! Bradley cleared his throat, the sound making Ed and Al snap to stand back at attention and firmly salute. Right, Ed exclaimed. We'll be sure to take her to meet her teachers later today. Our scary, scary teachers, both Elrics were thinking. Minami watched as Ed struggled to keep a straight demeanor, but his eyebrow kept twitching. Still, she wasn't surprised at the news that she would be getting started on training quickly. In fact, she was expecting it. You're dismissed, Bradley announced. And with that, Ed now walked ahead and each opened one of the double doors, waiting for Minami to exit before following her out. Once the door shut behind them, Minami let out a breath that sounded more like a wheeze. She whined. That was stressful. While Minami took a moment to compose herself, Ed looked up to Al, who returned his gaze. Glance. I don't know why I said gaze. Al leaned down to whisper to his brother while Minami's back was turned to them. Maybe they'll go easy on her once they see she's the Keyblade wielder? Hopefully? Don't count on it, Ed whispered back, but leaned away from his brother the moment Minami turned to face them. Well, we have some time to spare. Anything you have in mind you like or need to do? Ed asked her. Nope, Minami shrugged, seemingly indifferent. Ed expected to see a more sad expression on her face, but she actually seemed to be taking everything in stride today. I know, Al chimed in. Why don't we introduce Minami to Winry and Granny... Did I say introduce Winry? Introduce Minami to Winry and Granny Pinocchio. There we go, I can read. Oh yeah, Ed smiled at his brother. Good idea, Al. I might need a tune-up for my automail, so we gotta make sure our ship is in working condition. I'm sure Winry would want to meet Minami, too. Both brothers looked to Minami, who still wore a neutral expression, but she gave a nod to them. Sure, she said. Lead the way. I'm gonna switch to a casual. There we go. Yeah, that's nice. Cup time. Drink time. Alright, get rid of the cup. There we go. I'm learning how to do everything now. Okay. Take a sippy. Minami quietly followed Ed now through central headquarters to the lower levels of the building, walking into what looked like a garage. She stopped at the sight of a big spaceship, taking a moment to get a good look at it. That's our gummy ship, Al stepped beside her. You probably didn't get to take a good look at it before. Minami let out a weak chuckle as Al rubbed the back of his head, both of them recalling their last time in the gummy ship not being a particularly positive experience. Well, I know that it moves fast, Minami smiled sheepishly, trying to make light of the awkwardness. Hey, Winry, Granny, we're back, Ed called to the ship, and it wasn't until someone rolled out from under the ship on a creeper that Minami realized Ed was talking to them. The stranger sat up and flipped up their welder's mask to reveal a girl with bright blue eyes and blonde hair. Minami then noticed someone walk out from behind the ship to join her, someone even shorter than Ed, an old woman. Edward! The mechanic got up from her creeper and approached the trio with a smile, until she got within range of Ed to hit him over the head with the wrench that she held in her hand. Whack! Minami's eyes widened in shock. Gah! Ed yelped in pain, stepping back and holding his head. What was that for? Where were you? The girl yelled at him. I heard that you and Al barely escaped from a world literally swallowed by darkness, and you don't even come to let us know you're alright? Really? Oh, come on! We got out of it okay? We're fine, Ed argued. And the gummy ship is in one piece, too. It's not like we didn't check in on purpose. We've been occupied ever since we got back. Whatever, just give me your arm, the girl muttered, yanking Ed by the prosthetic and shoving his sleeve up his arm so that she could inspect it closely. Manami watched as the girl pulled Ed aside, but then noticed the old lady approaching her. So, you must be the Keyblade wielder they found, the woman said, holding a long pipe in her hand. I'm sorry about what happened to your world. At the very least, I trust the boys have been taking good care of you? Yeah, they have, Manami answered, putting on a small smile. She wondered to herself how Ed now knew these two. The girl was also blonde, and they called this old lady Granny. Were they all related? My name is Manami, she introduced herself, bowing her head politely. Pleased to meet you, my dear. I'm Pinako. Winry? Pinako barked to the young blonde mechanic who was still looking at Ed's arm. Come introduce yourself to the Keyblade wielder. You can fiddle and tinker with Ed's arm after. Huh? The one known as Winry looked up and noticed Manami standing with Pinako and Al. Oh! She quickly got up, leaving Ed to sit alone at her workstation as she approached Manami, embarrassed at the fact that she neglected arguably the most important person in the room. Sorry. Edward has a habit of busting his automail or the gummy ship, so I just needed to make sure that nothing was broken this time, she apologized. I only crashed the gummy ship once, I'll have you know, Ed barked from across the room. And how many times did you break your automail? Winry snapped back, to which Ed turned his head in silent defeat. I'm sorry, it just got me laughing. Winry is so good with the snapbacks. It's very impressive. Anyway, Winry looked back to Manami and extended a hand to shake. It's an honor to meet you. I'm Winry Rockbell. Granny Pinako and I are Ed and Al's personal mechanics and engineers. Nice to meet you too, Manami smiled back at her, taking her hand and shaking it. It was a little comforting that there was at least another girl her age around. Wow, why did I say that weird? There was at least a girl her age around. So, are you Ed and Al's sister? She asked. Huh? Me? Oh no, Winry laughed. You're not far off, though, Pinako said. They've been friends since they were born. Though I did practically raise those boys. Oh, I see, Manami nodded in understanding. Ed's eyes narrowed. He knew that Manami didn't know much about their past, and he saw this conversation possibly going in that direction. He decided to change the subject. Anyway, he pushed himself to roll across the room on his chair to be with the group. We've been staying at Mr. and Mrs. Hughes' place. Oh, really? Winry perked up. I should visit. I haven't seen Alicia in a while. Manami found herself to not be paying as much attention to the conversation, but instead staring at Ed's prosthetic arm. This whole time, he was wearing long sleeves and gloves. She didn't even know that his arm and leg were prosthetics until Al told her last night. But now she was actually seeing it for the first time. Winry had noticed Manami staring at it first, and grinned at her. You like it? I made it myself. Oh! Manami got a little flustered at the fact that she was caught staring, which probably was considered rude. Yeah, she smiled sheepishly. You really made all that? Uh-huh, Winry nodded. As well as his leg, as well as all the limbs that he's destroyed thus far. The blonde mechanic shot Ed a glare, but he once again turned his head to avoid seeing it. Manami blinked. Destroyed how? Well, Al and I have kind of run into some trouble here and there while we were on our journey. Before we met you, Ed explained, once again finding himself to be too close to the topic that he was trying to avoid. That or it just got damaged when we were on assignments for the military. I mean, these things happen, but that's why I have Winry. He let out a nervous laugh. How can you say that so casually? Winry asked him. Do you forget how much time, work, and effort I put into every single arm and leg I make for you? What, you think that gives you an excuse just to keep breaking them? She waved her wrench at his face, as a warning, then looked back to Manami. You know how many times this bean came back to us and his automail was in pieces? Or worse, he had no automail at all? What? No! Ed shook his head. I'm not using this as an excuse to keep breaking them. I just know that I can count on you, that's all. Wait, did you just call me a bean? Manami couldn't help but smile nervously as the two blondes argued. Al looked down to Manami, sparking his own topic of conversation. Don't worry, they usually argue like this, he told her. Anyway, automail's pretty neat, huh? Yeah, Manami said with a nod. We have the same thing on my world, too. I always thought it was neat to give someone something like that. Huh? Winry looked up from her and Ed's banter. You have automail? Well, it wasn't called automail specifically, but we have prosthetics. Yeah, like... Manami paused to reach in her pocket and pull out her cell phone. In times like this, Manami would access Moogle to look something up. but she was instead welcomed with the no service message at the top of her phone screen. That's right, there wouldn't be any service here in Amestris. Duh, she thought to herself. Minami looked up to see Winry staring curiously at the strange device in her hand. What is that? Everyone was carrying one of those around in her world, Ed mumbled, crossing his arms. Well, it's not much here, but at home, this was a cell phone, Minami explained, holding it up to show Winry. Can I see? Winry's eyes sparkled, but Minami couldn't help but feel a little nervous. I mean, it doesn't have its full capabilities here, she explained. It's just a camera and a music player. There's not a whole lot to look at. That tiny thing is a camera and it plays music? Winry squealed in excitement. I have to see how it works. Such a small, sleek, portable device. Minami began to sweat at the sight of the small screwdrivers that had appeared between Winry's fingers, like claws. Wait, Minami didn't say you could take it apart, Al interjected. Winry gave Minami a pleading look. I promise I'll put it back together. I'm really careful when it comes to taking things apart and putting them back together. I mean, if I can repair an advanced ship made for space travel, certainly I can repair something as simple as, what did you call it, a cell phone? Knock it off, will you, Winry? Ed sighed heavily. That phone thing is very important to Minami. Besides, you're supposed to be checking out my arm. Despite saying this, Ed was already back at his spot at next to the workstation, Pinako looking over his automail leg. Sorry, but he's right, Minami said quietly, holding her phone to her chest. Right now, this is the only thing I have from home. Oh, right. Winry looked down, feeling guilty that she had asked in the first place. Ah, shoot. I'm sorry. Still, Minami felt bad for saying no and disappointing Winry. How about this? When I get my world back, I'll bring you one to take apart and not have to sweat putting it back together. Would that be okay? You mean it? Winry suddenly grabbed both of Minami's hands to hold with her own, stars shining in her eyes. Oh, thank you, Minami! You really are pure-hearted! Minami couldn't help but smile in response. Hey, weren't you going to be looking at your craftsmanship, Miss Mechanic? Ed asked impatiently. All right. Winry rolled her eyes and let go of Minami's hands to join her grandmother and inspect Ed's automail arm. Minami watched Winry and Pinako as they talked a bunch of mechanical jargon, questioning Ed about what he had been doing, as well as the automail's functionality. Want a tour of the gummy ship? Al offered, and Minami nodded to him. Sure. She followed the suit of armor inside the rocket ship, and she was quick to notice that it was rather spacious. There were 3 pilot seats in the cockpit, and behind them was a small living quarter where there were 2 sets of bunk beds across from each other. The top bunks seemed to hold boxes full of what Minami assumed were rations and other inventory. She couldn't help but think of how strange and how out of place it was for a world that seemed to be so far behind in technology to have something this advanced. Huh, she hummed aloud, still looking around. Minami pulled back the curtain to one of the bottom bunks to see that it seemed to be already occupied. Not only were the sheets wrinkled, but there were also a couple stacks of books at the foot of the bed. She closed the curtain and investigated the other bottom bunk, across from the small walkway. This will be where you sleep, Al said, watching her as she sat down. Seems cozy. Minami noticed a window, but its cover was shut. Do these open? I mean, not totally open, but... Yeah, Al chuckled as Minami pushed the cover up and looked out the window, seeing Ed still with Winry and Pinako down below them. Brother says that looking out into space is actually a pretty relaxing way to go to sleep. I wouldn't know, I'm afraid, but you could give it a try. Minami smiled a little. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. With that, she stood up from the bed and closed the curtain to the small bunk. I just have one question. She looked up to the suit of armor. This is a pretty interesting spaceship. Considering that you guys don't know what a cell phone is, how do you have the technology to make something like this? Like, what year is it here anyway? Well, this technology isn't from our world, Al answered. We've actually formed an alliance with another world who've shared their gummy ship technology with us, and they taught us how we could utilize alchemy with it. Still, we don't even understand it 100% yet. Al paused, remembering Minami's other question. Oh, the year? It's 1914. Why? What year is it in your world? Wow, Minami blinked. In our world, it's 2019. That's amazing, Al exclaimed. If your technology is that advanced, I can only imagine what new ways to utilize alchemy your world has uncovered in that time, or what new kinds of magic you've all mastered for that matter. Actually, excuse me, Minami rubbed the back of her head. There is an alchemy in our world. Well, nothing like what you have here anyway. Really? Al blinked. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure we just call it chemistry in my world. There's no flashy sparks or anything, though. Minami looked up and thought. It's more like mixing different stuff in test tubes in a lab. At least that was how she always thought chemistry was. That was a class that she would have had to take in high school, probably. Huh. Al crossed his arms as he thought for a moment. That is how alchemy kind of came to be, at least according to the older texts, before it was radically changed 400 years ago. There are rumors that it came from other worlds entirely. Considering that Brother and I have been searching for answers, we're hoping to find them as we explore new worlds. Minami offered him a small smile. Yeah, I hope so too. Yay, and that's it. That's it, right? Yeah, that's it. That's it! Woohoo! We did it!